Good evening, everybody. I'm Dolores Dónal, Community Development Officer with Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council. Welcome you this evening to our lecture, part of our series Rippling Effects of the Great Irish Famine. This programme of lectures has been made possible through funding by the Executive Office of Northern Ireland, who part finance Council's Good Relations Community Development Programme. I'd like to welcome tonight our speaker, Dr. Dónal McAnallen. Dónal is the Library and Archives Manager for National Museums NI based in Cultra. His topic tonight is the Great Famine on the Powerscourt Estate and along the Blackwater, 1845 to 1852. Welcome, Dónal.
Thank you, Dolores. I'll just get this on now then. Hold on a second. It's been a while since I used Zoom, so hold on a second. Remind me
don't
we're
worry.
doing a video.
Yep.
No. How am I sharing again?
Sorry. People in the audience are probably shaking their heads with me because I'm doing this every week, but I'm never actually sharing stuff.
I'm used to using Teams all the time now, so.
Yeah. Now let me just.
Oh, here we are.
see.
See, share now. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay.
This was just de rigueur a couple of years ago. Okay. Hopefully that'll be visible.
Yeah, that's it now.
Okay. I just need to make that in the right proportions. How do I get to?
You at the very top.
Yeah. Okay. Is that
brilliant?
All visible, and am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
I'm just going to mute myself.
Okay. Keep me right about the time here, Dolores or Jared, because I'm going to have to do a whistle. This is going to be a breakneck tour through some local aspects. I'm not working from script here. I'm using the images to prompt me.
Okay.
So,
could I just mention, Dónal, I suppose you can just give a quick background. Is that okay? The location, just for our international audience.
Oh, I will, of course. Yeah.
Is that okay? That's great. Thanks a million.
Well, thank you all for tuning in. This subject started off with my late father about 7 years ago from a local angle, looking to investigate or reinvestigate something that had intrigued him for years since he first got involved in local history projects in the early 80s. I suppose it was his first subject he investigated, maybe his last. He handed me this article about 5 years ago and said, "Would you edit that?" My editing ended up taking a whole different direction. I'm not going to get this published, but it's not quite there yet, but very nearly. There's my father in the village of Benburb, working out where he thought the soup was being served in the soup kitchens. So he died August 22, so I'd like to get this published as soon as possible. It's been deferred, but we'll get there. Anyway, when we talk about the Great Famine in the Powerscourt Estate, where are we talking about? Well, we're talking about that little corner of Tyrone, which borders Armagh, which comprises, at its heart, the village of Benburb, but also goes up to around the edge of what is now part of the Moy, just on the Benburb side. Doesn't go as far as Blackwater town. Goes up as far as what is the edge in parts of the M1 motorway near what the Eglish turnoff. Then goes down towards the present day village of Eglish in Tyrone, but only on that side, not on the Calicial side, not on the Ballygolly side, and then goes as far as the edge of the Brantry rural district. So that's the area covered. There's about 40. Sorry, I can't remember exactly. 48 townlands. But this started off. Charles Dillon, a local historian who also died just a few short months ago, well published, wrote an article on the subject, and in the area of this Clonfeacle parish, which Powerscourt Estate corresponds with to a large extent, and also adjoining parts of County Armagh in the parishes of Tirani and Loughgall, so Clonfeacle and Loughgall, and the shading in the areas which he shaded in the Dúchainaíl Journal article, which you see there. You probably can't see the graphic because of our own headshots here, but I don't know if I can move that. Does it make any difference? Does it make any difference when I do that? No. Does that make a difference, Dolores? No.
No.
No, it doesn't. Okay. Well, the areas that are shaded in the darkest there are the ones that suffered the most population loss. And that includes a lot of the townlands around the village of Benburb. As you can see, Benburb's actually light shaded in toward just below the middle of that image. But a lot of the townlands immediately around it lost 50%, 40, 50%, and even in some cases a little bit more. And then also on the edges of these parishes. But so that was huge population change between 1841 and 1851. And clearly this was the period of the famine. But there weren't a whole lot of records of famine graves or such like in the area. So the exact reasons was, how much of this was emigration? Was there a significant rate of death? Were there other local factors? But one of the great myths has been, that, as Jared McAnallen has covered many times, that the famine didn't really affect Ulster, or maybe not even the northeast. I suppose Benburb was the edge of it, but it did. So I'll rush through a few more. So there's the population changes in the context. The parishes in question we're talking about are Clonfecal, Dungannon part, which is would lost the population change was minus 33%, so a third lost in that decade. The areas around it, Clonfecal Parish, Armagh, that's not in this Powerscourt Estate, but it's obviously adjoining. Aglish Parish is not the Aglish of Tyrone today. It's Aglish of what people now call Tullysarn, although that's not exactly correct what it is. Lochgall also would cover part of it. It would be nearby. But anyway, that's the context. Significant population decreased during that period in all of these local areas, but among those, this area was actually the greatest decrease. And there's the estate according to a recent map. So you can the Powerscourt Estate itself. So you can have that's the map that appears in the Benburb Priory designed for it. So just to rush through very quickly, the Powerscourts had been in Benburb. The Wingfield family, the Powerscourt Estate comprised of estate in 4 counties. The main one was Wicklow, a little part of South Dublin, a part of Wexford, and this little portion of Tyrone. And they had been the Wingfields had been here since the 17th century. And in this case, at this period, in 1836, was it the 6th Lord Viscount Powerscourt came to Benburb, and it was an occasion of great ceremony and celebration, bonfires lit, and this was his first visit to the village, and it was reported on as a really important occasion in the village life. So all was well according to that. Benburb, in many respects, seemed to be going through a period of great growth. You had a whole range of schools being built. This is obviously the National Board of Education that set up the national schools in the early 1830s, but these were not national schools. For the most part, these were Hibernian Bible schools set up by the Earl of Roden. These were not answering to the National Board of Education, so there was an evangelical element to them, I suppose you could say, through Earl of Roden. But there was also an hotel built in the Powerscourt Arms Hotel built in the village, late 1830s. You had some other businesses set up. There was a lot of things going on there. That's just from the Powerscourt Estates there, which describes some of the activities going on at this time. I don't really have time to do justice to it, but it was a time when the modern village that we know, took shape to a large extent. Some of the older buildings were there, but a lot of the architecture that people know today and are familiar with really came in. So on the face of it, it was doing well. But this was also a time of huge upheaval in the periods before, in the immediate decades before that, as this map shows, or this is to do with adult males and rural parish populations. It's the effect of the decline of the linen trade, and Benburb was at the corner of the linen triangle, just as it is, just to maybe on the map, maybe just southwest of Lough Neagh, and that was one of the areas which was most affected. I don't have time to go into these in great percentage details. Now, what was also happening in the late 1830s and early 1840s? This is from the Devon Commission, which took place in 1844, into the inquiry into the occupation of land in Ireland. And among many people around Ireland interviewed on that was George Darley Cranfield. He had been the estate agent from 1836, was an army captain before that, and he gives significant details about it. Again, don't have time to go into great detail here, but it talks about how the number of people on the land, which it was a very big population then, had grown tremendously since the late 18th century. So he was the main man in charge of it because, of course, Powerscourt were based for the most part elsewhere. And indeed, this Powerscourt actually lived, he was an MP, and he also was, from a young age, and he was also living in Italy to a large extent. But during Cranfield was very much a reformer. There was already a lot of pressure on the land, and he was proactive in leading a policy of consolidation of farms. That is, getting rid of, obviously in the decades before, as the population grew, as many people will know, there's a lot of subdivision of farms. They were divided among children, so that each had a smaller plot of land on which they survived, on maybe on the potatoes that they grew, or little else. But people like Cranfield, trying to reform things, introduce changes where they try to consolidate farms, make them bigger, make them more sustainable, as they would see them. So he talks about, he's asked, the condition of labour is getting better? No. The cause of the general depreciation, the low price of produce and the want of employment for the weavers. So that's a reflection of the decline of the linen industry since the Napoleonic Wars in the 1810s. And it talks about also what has happened at the top of the questions. What has happened to the people who lost their farms due to the consolidation? Generally, the 71 farms, they've generally gone to America. They were given full compensation, and except for a few who were put out, and so on. He had to threaten to expel the tenants. Now, Cranfield from the start antagonised some local people by this, and here's an example of a threatening letter that he received in his first year there, where he was warned that the tenants would join in doing away with him for his spilling the girl's milk with I'm not sure, a power, and attempting to kill the child on the road. And this is his horse that he was on, and basically making him threats that they'll shoot him, that for his tyrant infidel behaviour, and be a good agent, and we'll be a good tenantry. Be a tyrant, and we will be hostile and not suffer it. So clearly he had ruffled feathers, to put it mildly, from the start. The top part of it wasn't just about that incident. The top part refers to the payment of rents, and how he was allegedly attempting to starve one part of the people. I presume that means the Catholic section, and then have godly obedience from the other, being presumably the Protestant section of the population. And it was very much a mixed population in the area. He himself, though, in this evidence, made statements which were quite unique for that commission, which suggested that there was almost a policy, you could say, of plantation. And where he talks about, in the questions he's asked, he prefers the advantage on the side of the Protestants. He would prefer a Protestant to buy land if it was being sold. Is a Protestant prevented selling to a Roman Catholic? Yes. And so on and so on. So he's basically saying Protestants are better tenants, and that's who we'd rather have. And this wasn't uniquely him in this area. This is another report from the Northern Standard in 1841, where it refers to the Reverend Henry Griffin, who owned the Glebe land, which was within the estate, land covered by the estate, but separately governed by, because the Glebe land was obviously belonged to the local rector of the Church of Ireland. And in this case, that's Reverend Henry Griffin, who later became the Bishop of Limerick. And it talks about how they were granting leases to Protestant tenants and encouraging Protestant settlers in their lands. So this was, among the evidence, this is a very strong thing that's going on in this area in particular at that time. It's not as strongly evident in other areas. The reason I'm mentioning this is because the famine doesn't happen in isolation. You've got a whole lot of tension, sectarian and political tension in areas such as this, or acutely in this area. And this definitely feeds into the whole sense of commotion that's going on at this time, to put it mildly. Then on top of that, the Poor Law Act was brought in 1838, with the first form of local politics. The Poor Law elections took place in 1839, and then it was alleged that the Powerscourt Estate had sent out its bailiffs to tell people to vote for a certain candidate favoured by the estate, and if they didn't, then they wouldn't be able to get money from the Benburb Loan Fund. And then in response to that, the Catholic Church, Reverend Michael Coyne, from the pulpit, actually told his flock to vote for the other candidates, and this is complained about in the press. And this is the dynamics which we'll rush through. Meanwhile, at the far end of the estate, Eglish, which was only a hamlet. This is from a map in 1770. Eglish is not even it's the first time it actually appears anywhere. It's a tiny little dot beside the graveyard. It's only becoming a sort of a Catholic, pardon the use of the term, like an enclave within the estate at that time. And the Church of Catholic was rebuilt in Eglish in 1834-35, reopened as such, and that was under a long-term lease by the estate, but it was the only Catholic land on it. And next door to that was the schoolhouse, Rowan School, which was built there, opened. It was very much before that had been an attempt to set up a national school on a cross-community basis. It hadn't worked out, so the parish priest in Eglish at this time, with a sort of emboldened spirit among the Catholics at the time, said, "No, we're going to set up our own one." And the only land that it could get was adjoining the graveyard, because it was the only part that the Catholic Church had any sort of say in that area. So this is how Rowan came to be established. But then, in line with sort of the political trends that were going on at that time, there was O'Connelism was going through another surge in the early 1840s, and one Sunday, for example, in this instance, in 1841, there was a meeting in the churchyard afterwards, and speeches were made, including by the parish priest O'Neill and the curate, Reverend James Coyne. I'm not sure how he's related to Reverend Michael Coyne in the Moy, but they must have been close enough, whether cousins or uncle nephew, I'm not sure. But this is basically a statement which is talking about the politics of the day and things that were offensive to those in charge of the Powerscourt Estate, it would seem, because shortly after this appeared in the national press. There was a standoff at Rowan School where the school master was given £25, essentially a bribe. This is reported in the Freeman's Journal for the keys of the schoolhouse. It was put under lock and key, under armed guard, and then as the parishioners were going to church on the Sunday, there was a fear to fray, and there was a huge presence on the day. But it seems to me that this was the response of the Powerscourt Estate to the use of the Catholic churchyard for political statements. So they were saying, if you're going, I think this is a response to that the Powerscourt Estate and the bailiffs unhappy about this. How dare they do this? They have this under lease from us, and now they're making political statements which are antagonistic to our class. And anyway, this is Powerscourt Estate, the Powerscourt himself, the Earl of Powerscourt's explanation. He put up a completely other theory, which seems quite bizarre. He talked about there being a row between the parish priest and the parishioners. I don't think that was what the cause of this tension was at all. Anyway, another interesting thing, just as another sidelight on what's going on here, between mid-1830s and the mid-1840s, orange processions were actually banned after some violent incidents. But Una Bridge between Benburb and the Down seems to have been one of the several sites of processions during that time. And I reckon this may be the biggest orange procession on the 150th anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne in 1840, which took place on the 13th of July, because it was a Sunday, the 12th. And on this occasion, it was said that there were 200 men and boys taking part, and a crowd of 1,000 people watching on. And they stopped at the tavern at the other side of this, owned by Lockhart's, which was also number 4 Orange Lodge, Knocknacloy. And there were prosecutions arising out of this. But when it came to Cranfield, that man, the estate agent, being the presiding judge of the 3 magistrates, he said, "I don't know how this could be seen to be a political or religious event. It took place on the 13th of July. Why would that be anything?" So by a 2-to-1 majority, the prosecutions didn't proceed. So you can see all the different things going on there. The illegal processions, such as they were, the popularity of the processions, how would I say, the partisanship of the jury, that being interwoven with the politics of the estate, and so on. And there's an orange parade on Christmas Day between Benburb and Crewe Bridge, the townland of Crewe, which is, as I said, in the Powerscourt Estate, and parading all over. Anyway, this wasn't happening in isolation. The O'Connellite movement was growing. Here's a repeal movement card owned by Edward White of Benburb in 1843. So this was growing. We don't have as much material relating to this from the local area, but there was clearly stuff going on. And in response to that, there was a lot of alarm in the
Sorry,
Protestant press.
sorry, Dónal, can I
Yes.
ask you, could you briefly explain just what the O'Connellite movement was, just to for maybe some of our listeners?
Of course, of course. And
All right,
like
thank you.
I fear I'm going to run out of time here, but I'll keep
No,
going.
don't worry, you're
Yeah,
fine. Don't
yeah, yeah.
worry, you're fine. Don't
Dolores,
worry. Calm.
yeah, the O'Connellite movement. Basically, Daniel O'Connell was the leader of Catholic Ireland in political terms in the 1820s, and as a result of his campaign, Catholic emancipation had been granted in 1829, and he was regarded as the liberator. That was his nickname. And through the 1830s, he continued all his campaigns. But there were again, as he turned his sights to the repeal of the Act of Union in the 1840s, there were mass meetings held around Ireland, including one meeting in Clontarf, Dublin, which was said to have been attended by over 200,000. Now, of course, we're depending on reporting style of the time. It may not have been quite that, but huge mass meetings, as they were called. So hundreds of thousands, allegedly, at least tens of thousands, scores of thousands. And this was significant because, there was still, incredible to say, but I think there's something in it. There was something of a border around Ulster even then, not in the physical, in terms of physical line, but there was this sense of Ulster being invaded, that Ulster was, Northeast Ulster in particular, was Protestant Unionist. They didn't necessarily say Unionist, they might have said Conservative, whatever, but it was predominantly Protestant since the times of the plantation. And there was this great sense that if O'Connellite movement, as it penetrated into the northeast, it would be repelled from that, and it caused antagonism the further north it would go. So this would, you could say that areas such as this was on that frontier, which were, between Protestant domination and or probably Protestant majority and Catholic majority, sort of, and the politics that went with it. So in this case, in 1843, around the same time as the repeal movement under O'Connell is making inroads locally, you find, for example, in the Newry Telegraph, which was very much aligned with Protestant politics, you find a meeting reported of the Protestant Confederation Society of Benburb, and they're talking about their alarm about the government perhaps considering the question of the repeal of the Union and so on, and pledging their allegiance, and their talking about their good friend, the Earl of Roden. The Earl of Roden being I didn't say at the start, was the father-in-law of Powerscourt himself, and that becomes very significant, as we see in a moment, because Powerscourt dies at a young age in 1844. So the Earl of Roden ends up becoming the man in charge, although never actually living here. The Earl of Roden was, I mean, he owned large part of Dundalk, as well as being, in charge then, the main man in charge of the Powerscourt estate after Powerscourt died. He lived at Tullymore Park, County Down, and was also one of the most. He had been actually a member of the. He had been a significant figure, and I'm trying to think of the Royal Court even, but he had been an MP before for Louth, and by the 1840s, one of the leading Irish members of the House of Lords. Also, perhaps the leading evangelical figure in Ireland at that time, and had been Grand Master of the Orange Order. So, for various reasons, he was reviled by a lot of the Catholic press and population. Maybe not always fairly, but because of his connection and all those things and the high tensions of the time, that was how so this man, the leading member of the House of Lords, is essentially the man. Irish member is the man in charge of this area by default at that time. And here you find sorry, I can't see this at the time. I can't see this properly because of the way that's 1843. There's the 12th of July, 1843. You find at this time huge sort of reports of meetings of demonstrations of loyalty. And the 12th of July, 1843. This was still not, the Orange processions weren't legal, but they demonstrated their loyalty by meeting for dinner in the Powerscourt Arms Hotel and pledging various different motions and resolutions with 3 times 3, 9 times 9 to Queen and to various other members of the establishment, and vowing to reject any attempt to repeal the Union. And then I think partly as a result of that, Lord Powerscourt, sorry, this is before Powerscourt died, obviously, but he died quite suddenly in 1844. But in 1843, he made a very triumphant visit to the village, which is reported with great favour in the Unionist press, for want of a better phrase, or Conservative press, and talks about how the great sense of anticipation and the great welcome that he received. The Freeman's Journal on the right gave a mocking report of his visit, and talked about how the people, basically, it compared the people almost who were welcoming him, and almost that they would become Oh, the horses of his chariot. I can't do justice to it now, but anyway, he visited, and he made a speech which seemed to be orientated towards confirming to the local people that he would be supportive of he appreciated their support for the union, and there's their pledge, there's their address to him on the left hand side, and on the right hand side he refers to this insane agitation for the repeal of the union, and that he would certainly oppose this with as much as he possibly could. I'll skip forward here. Robert Wilson, well, this is a map that he designed of Blackwater town in 1845. Robert Wilson is an intriguing figure in all this. He was an engineer. He was also employed as an under agent for the Powerscourt Estate, and he appears through all this. He and his wife had the Powerscourt Arms Hotel at that time. Under them, they had a shop there within it. They were involved in everything, and but intrigues throughout the famine period. So, for example, November 1845, this is a fake news story of his death. It was replanted in the national press. Now, of course, the famine had already begun, although not so strong in this part at that stage. But why was somebody planting this story in the press about this underage of the estate, amongst other things? And he did work around the country as an engineer on roads and such like. And also on top of this, you have threatening letters. I mean, another example of the tension on the land. This you can see if you can't read the letter, you can certainly see from the cartoon images of cutlasses or swords or guns or whatever has been on at a coffin. Death, no money. This is between neighbours by Shyford Boy, sent to David Smith of Garvaghey, and it makes all sorts of choice comments about his wife as well as he himself. She's a common flag walker. And talking about send David Wiley's ducks, I can't read it properly there, and Michael Dugan's geese home, and James Connolly's spade home. So smallest of agricultural rows or about farmers, but basically it's death threats. If you can read anything into that. But these are in the National Archives in Dublin. So I suppose I'm just saying, people were not all getting on very well at this time. Now. This is another example. No, I'll just skip forward. Because the time is not our friend here. So this is a remarkable document. Now, I don't know of any other equivalent locally or indeed elsewhere, although Jared may be able to tell me. This is an abstract report from the potato harvest in Loughgall and Charlemont. I show this simply because it's a remarkable document for statistics. So this shows the condition of the poor and the state of the potatoes in 61 townlands in the Petty Sessions district of Loughgall and Charlemont. So that includes... Does that include up to Blackwater town? I think it may. So this is done by the Loughgall Providence Society, and you can't read that properly, I don't think. But it gives for every landlord the number of families, the number of able-bodied men, total inmates, as they call them. That doesn't mean prisoners though. And then it talks the number of potatoes planted, the number that were good and the number were bad. So there you, for example, at the top, His Grace the Lord Primate, the Bishop, Church of Ireland, 4,000 good potatoes, 6,928 bad ones. So you get an impression of this is really strong, even if it's just one local area, of how this affected the local area. A remarkable amount of counting, to do that. So I'll not go through that in detail, but this exists, and you can see the various totals at the bottom there. So it's counting 184,119 good potatoes and 121,152 bad potatoes in that year's crop. Isn't that a remarkable piece of counting? And of course, that wasn't the worst of things. Things would get worse. To move on, now we're talking about that's the Baron of Charlemont, the second Earl, of course. I mention him simply because I'm not going to have time to do justice to the Armagh side of things here, but it's ABC Council, so it'd be wrong if I didn't give occasional nods to them. So Charlemont, this is Baron Charlemont who was in charge of the lands on the other side of the Blackwater here. What's now still was the Charlemont village and Blackwater, and I'm sorry, I'm a little bit lost in my mind here. It would cover also what people called Tullysaran today, but I can't remember exactly the parameters of how far it went towards Loughgall. But we'll rush on because
and just suppose, Dónal, just for people who don't know, Charlemont village and Moy are just separated by a river, the Blackwater.
And a county boundary.
And a county boundary, Tyrone and Armagh. Tyrone Moy been in Tyrone and Charlemont been in County Armagh.
Exactly. So yes, indeed, well said. Um,
Um,
so
just Donal, just Imelda in the chat has asked, why is there no time tonight? I think people are feeling you're putting yourself under serious pressure and rushing yourself.
because there's so much, no, the reason I'm doing it is because there's so much here, and I couldn't work out what to leave out. I said it doesn't make sense if I don't tell you the story. Unless you want to go for a part two, we can do
We
that.
can always do a part two. Don't worry, we can always do a part two.
Well, let's see what people think at the end then. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Whenever you shout stop. So this is I mentioned Parliament there as well. This is intriguing. This is a letter that he wrote in November 1845, and he just says he'd returned from attendance at the petty session of the town of Moy, and he talks about how that Mr. Hoare, an extremely intelligent man, he's quite. Parliament isn't unduly. I wouldn't say he's complacent at this time, but he's still quite comfortable that the worst afflictions of what's the stories that are coming from the south about the famine at this stage, and 1845 wasn't the worst year, that it wasn't really affecting them in a terrible way, despite the clear loss of potatoes, that nobody was going to die of starvation, certainly in that area, in his estate or in the immediate area. But he does say that he was talking to Mr. Hoare, who'd replaced Cranfield. Walter Hoare came as the new agent of the estate in 1844, the Powerscourt Estate, that is not his own. Powerscourt Estate, Walter Hoare, an extremely intelligent man, a young gentleman who has the care of the Powerscourt Estate, Benburb, and the report of the state of things as to the malady or sickness is, I am sorry to say, discouraging indeed. Sorry, I'm failing to read that, the lamentable subject. So he's basically saying this famine is, the state of things is worse even in the Powerscourt Estate than it is in ours. And so I don't know, is that true? And what can we make from that? But there you are. Robert Peel, of course, was the Prime Minister, the Tory or Conservative Prime Minister at that time. And in the early part of the famine, he did, order Peel's brimstone, as it was, Indian corn. And it's part of the well-known story of the famine that he did try to bring in supplies. And in terms of responses from Westminster, it turned out not to be the worst. But his leadership was under pressure the whole time. But here's some more statistics from around Benburb from the National Archives. So this is recorded by the police. So these are the potatoes planted in Benburb in 1844 to 1846, for example. So you can see this. Now these are broken down into police districts. So in the Clonfeacle, this is the Benburb Police District. There were 1,094 acres planted with potatoes in 1844 and a similar number in 1845. And it talks about Conacre, which was sort of the cottier class, the poorest class. How many were planted by potatoes by them? So you get a sense of how dependent the population was on the potatoes from that. And the only other crops being sown by the edible crops were flax and turnips. Just for the very fact that many acres were in Conacre shows a particularly high density of population. In a lot of areas, even at this time, you wouldn't have had, in Ulster anyway, in North East, you wouldn't have had Conacre at all. So that's one example. And do we have another one there? There is Tirani, which this is actually reported from the Blackwater Town Police District, or the constable in Blackwater Town. And there's a bigger area again, covered in Conacre, up to 115, and it's significantly, it's actually increased. In some areas, this decreases during the early years of the famine. This increases, which suggests things are getting very bad there. So again, I don't want to dwell unduly on these images because there's so many of them, but they were planting, instead of potatoes, wheat, oats, and turnip there. Then do we have another one of these? No. And alongside all this, this is just a sidelight, which doesn't necessarily directly, you might say, reflect the famine, but other stuff in life was going on. And as I said, there was a lot of intrigue, reports that there always are, I suppose. But there seems to be a lot of commotion in a lot of areas. And here's an example of murder of a man called James Patterson, whose body was found near Benburb. And this was, of course, a matter of a court investigation during that time. And I suppose the reason I mention this is that the inquest was held at Benburb, but it's the fact that the people who were guilty of found guilty of this, or alleged of this, I think they were found guilty, was it was it Jane? Was it his? It was somebody in his family, a female member of his family, and her stepson maybe. And but she was going off to Glasgow, and they were trying to raise enough money to get to America. And I suppose it comes out in the court evidence that, you know, uh, before she was charged with murder, I suppose there was the element of escape, to America was it comes out. You don't very often hear from people their actual accounts or the testimonies of their plans to emigrate at that time. So it's just an example of an extreme case where that comes out. Now, this is where it gets very intriguing. So the famine really begins to hit an area like Benburb in the summer of 1846, and indeed Ulster. 1845 wasn't as bad, though it was bad. Um, Now, you see things beginning to happen in July 1846, and I can't quite piece all this together. Maybe nobody can, but I find there's something going on different levels. Why does Derry Fubble, a hamlet, maybe you could have called it a village then, as a hamlet, sort of equidistant between Benburb, the present village of Eglish, and the Moy, about 2 or 3 miles from each. Why does it suddenly have an agricultural debating club in July 1846? Note the respectable young men of Derry Fubble. I'm sure they were all respectable. It makes a point of saying that. So it proposes to meet regularly and discuss subjects exclusively agricultural. And they had sat down at a tea, and then it names them, or some of the leading speakers at this. I'll leave that there for a moment. No, I'm not linking these two at all. Because this is an actual fact. Most of those members of that club seem to have been Protestant, and in this case, this seems to be a Protestant man also who was returning home to Derry Creevy nearby, and he has been pursued by 9 or 10 men as far as the Battleford Bridge, Benburb, which is another bridge between Tyrone and Armagh. This is happening also at around the same time. A sectarian affray. Now, as I said, this was certainly not the first or the last, but. Now, this is again another fascinating thing. August 1846. This didn't appear. This appeared first of all in the Impartial Reporter in Fermanagh, and it talks about. It gets its geography wrong, but where's this coming from? It talks about how the Molly Maguires were at Ahatara, which is it's around Tullymore, which is just beside that Battleford Bridge area that I mentioned. But on the Armagh side, how the Molly Maguires had met and gone on military parade for 3 hours, and they were firing many volleys for O'Connell and Repeal, and there was supposed to have been some people killed. Now this was rubbished. This was made little of. This was said this was a ridiculous story in the press. But where
Dónal.
did this come from? Was there any truth in it whatsoever?
Sorry,
I can't get
Dónal.
yeah.
Sorry, who were the Molly Maguires?
The Molly Maguires, yes, the Molly Maguires were a secret society. I can't remember their exact when that name first existed, but throughout rural Ireland from the late 18th century, if not earlier, there were a lot of secret societies that engaged in rural agrarian protest. You had other groups such as the Terry Alts and the White Boys and the Oak Boys, and they engaged in acts of vandalism as a way of protesting about agricultural conditions and so on. So
Thank you.
So in this case, this was reported, and we never really get to the bottom of this because Molly Maguire's, unlike Derry Football Agricultural Society, weren't putting reports in the papers themselves, and they weren't leaving minute books. They were their very nature secret. But it does seem, and there was a lot of alarmism about them among. You can see the likes of the Confederate Society of Benburb, the loyal, people are meeting in the Orange Order and so on. But it's very likely that there was some secret society, but it was just very hard to quantify who, were, when. But the very idea of their existence was certainly causing a lot of agitation. And when you see some of the other stuff, you'll see certainly people were doing things in a clandestine way. Now, this then occurs also in August 1846, and this is where you see the famine is beginning to really. This is the first sort of signs where you can see there's people unhappy in a big way. Malicious outrage. On Saturday night last, some heartless ruffians came to Curran Lough, which is about 2 miles from Benburb, on the Derry Fubble Road towards Dungannon, and they destroyed a pleasure boat belonging to Walter Hoare, the Powerscourt estate agent, and destroyed nearly 1 rood of turf. Excellent turf belonged to Constable William McGann of the Curran Estate. I think that's Benburb Police Station. I don't think there was a station at Curran. But why are they attacking it? You've got to. My sense is this is something to do with rents, something to do with unhappiness about how the estate through the agent is approaching these matters. And I can't help but wonder, what did the people of the Derry Fubble Agriculture Society, a few hundred yards away, what did they think about this? Then you find around, this is September, you find threatening notice appearing on the Powerscourt Estate around Benburb, signed by Captain Fear Not, and that was a pseudonym used by the Terry Alts in the 18th century and others of secret society. Take notice, Mr. Hoare. Seeing the blight on the potato crop, here we are, has become so alarming, we were going to caution the occupying tenant, particularly those who may be called capitalists, and also those who have been in the habit of tendering their rents at an early period from sinister motives, not to let their motives or large purposes induce them to do so this season, until there's an understanding between the representatives of Lord Powerscourt and the tenantry. We trust the lovers of humanity and agricultural interest will take notice of any person, will not take down any of these circulars, will brand us not as Molly Maguires, but if you wish to mention us at all, you may use the following gilt letters: the lovers of humanity. We have got a good gentleman to deal with, Mr. Hoare. NB, we hope our neighbouring estates will take patron. What do we take from this? Several things. The police report said these were written by people of some education, of some learning, suggested maybe a local clerk. The fact that this is written this way suggests that there was already unhappiness, that some of the bigger farmers were paying their rents early, and that they were trying to see that maybe they hoped that they would be able to get some of the lands that other people who were failing to pay, who were unable to pay, that maybe they'd be able to get some of their land themselves through consolidation, or people being evicted. And you also have the call to arms to members of neighbouring estates. You have a sense almost of cross community, or I don't know if that's the right term, but an attempt to galvanise support and similar action or some form of agitation if there was any attempt to force people out because they couldn't pay their rents. Now, and lo and behold, this appeared again then the next month, October 1846, a follow-up threatening notice, again aimed at Mr. Hoare, this one on his own yard gate in Benburb and at the Church of Ireland. Notice, no Molly Maguires but Friends of Humanity, which suggests we're written by the same person or people. Whereas a notice was posted at several places in the district of Benburb and they were taken down to the bailiffs of the estate, we now warn them that if they interfere with this notice or their agent, Mr. Hoare, we will pay them a visit shortly. No rents this year, no meal to be out of the country. So there you can see a reference to the rents again. We're not able to pay, don't force us to. And also, don't be sending meal out, let the local people be fed. And that's a first reference to the idea of hunger in this area. So threatening notices are maybe the only real sense that we have of the true feelings of some of the, we wouldn't even say peasantry, small farmers here at that time. Now, another very interesting aspect, this is intriguing. The Armagh Guardian was one of a number of local newspapers which only started in 1844. Also, the Ulster Gazette in Armagh started in that year, and the Tyrone Constitution in Omagh. And there are three of our main sources for it because there was no Dungannon newspaper at that time. But look at this. Immediately after these reports were reported in the Armagh Guardian, the editor of the Armagh Guardian talks about that it refers to a man, as a person, calling himself Argus, stating that these threatening notices are not representative of the true feelings of the Powerscourt Estate, and that they hope that the culprit may be detected. So Argus has told them this is not true. Don't believe this at all. Don't be reporting this. However, oh, sorry, that shouldn't be there. Sorry. And then the Guardian follows up with another the following week with talks about these threatening letters. And it appears to us that the statement made to us by Mr. Robert Wilson, I talked about him being the engineer and the man who owned the hotel in Benburb, that those letters didn't represent the feelings of the people. But we've since heard otherwise. And to make the matter short, as we're now just in a hurry, he wrote to us, Mr. Wilson, and spoke to us, and threatened us if we would not deliver up our correspondence named, which we did not, nor never will. There you are. Protect your sources. He then sent us the following epistle. I am in receipt of your note, and I have to regret you to come to the conclusion. Relative to the notice, you will please furnish my account and stop sending me your paper. Now, that might look like stop sending me your personal subscription that I'm getting for your paper. I wonder, does it mean I'm going to stop selling your paper in my shop? I suspect it did. He would have probably been the local agent for selling the newspaper there, as he had the shop in the village. And look at the Guardian's response. Well, there they are for you, Mr. Wilson. Take your name, your pound of money, and your grain of influence. May they increase your store, but remember, never shall they force us to break trust, even with a beggar, if their united efforts doomed us to rot in the foulest dungeon. Now, fascinating on many levels. From the start in 1844, the Armagh Guardian declared itself, for want of a better term, a unionist paper. It was, but Robert Wilson was from probably the same social background as it would have, as a lot of the people who would have read it. And so what's going on here? I can't help but wonder, why is Robert Wilson writing to the Guardian at all about this? Why should he has enough on his plate? I can't help but wonder, he's the underagent of the estate. Was he put up to do this by a member of the estate, a key member of the estate, such as Robert, or such as Walter Hoare, the agent? And why else would he got involved in this? But one of the consequences of this is that, as far as I can see, there's less reporting done on Benburb in the next few years, and we may lose out on reports, because if you think about it, if it's not being sold in Benburb, well, then there's less reason to report from that area. This I'm deducing based on the reports that have gone through, and from that, this is one of a number. I've talked about the fake death story about him, the hoax death story about, and this must have been very difficult for Wilson, because he's basically being outed in a newspaper as being out to find out the identity of tenants who are objecting, and this puts him already, this outs him sort of in an inimical way towards the tenants of the estate. Not a nice place to be in for him. And yeah. Dolores, how much longer will you allow me to go for?
You're okay for another while.
Okay, you just shout
Another.
stop. You shout stop when you
What do
can't
you
listen
think
anymore.
about another half an hour?
If you can listen, that's good. Okay.
Yeah, no worries. Go ahead.
Yep. So in response to what's going on, autumn of 1846, the landlords of Ulster, in one shape or form, respond. As you can see from those threatening notices, things were getting very difficult by September, October, and different landlords were beginning to have to come to decisions by October, November about reducing rents. Now, the Earl of Roden, by not being a residential landlord, was not the first. Uh, for example, Lord Caledon nearby was came out with a reduction slightly before him, but Roden eventually, as trustee for Powerscourt Estate, he then his name appeared on a statement that the rentals would be reduced to 1/3 if it's under 10%, or £10, sorry, 2/3 if under 15%, and so on. So it's referred to in the I think this might be from the Armagh Guardian or from the Newry Telegraph. It refers to this as another instance of kind landlordism. Well, it was an act of benevolence. It wasn't particularly much kinder than other. It wasn't the worst it wasn't the meanest of rent reductions, and it wasn't the most benevolent either. It was somewhere in between. It wasn't the quickest, but nonetheless, it was made. Um, and in this statement about this, Roden was prone to say a lot and write a lot, and he wasn't shy about giving self praise. And you can see in the very first line a lot of his philosophy. A very deeply religious man, written from the dock in this instance. My dear friends, in the providence of God, and there's that word providence, because as some of you may know about perceptions of the famine, it was regarded by many people, from a Protestant and British perspective, as a providential visitation from God, that it was a correction, that it was a rectifying of the order, that Ireland had got overpopulated, a Malthusian sort of idea, and that what was happening was, it was an action, a providential act of God. And well, I suppose act of God can refer to any natural disaster, but that God's hand was deliberately at work here. And the So he talks about how this for the second time he has taken charge of the state after two of his previous Powerscourt relations had died, and he talks about his deep sense of feeling for the tenantry of the estate and their sufferings. And so he talks about how he's adopting rents similar to a neighbouring estate. I presume that's either Caledon or Charlemont. And he hopes to visit Benburb in the course of a short time, and he hadn't visited it before. So famine relief, I skirted around just what Peel, but of course, from June 1846, there was new political leadership. In Lord John Russell was the Prime Minister, the Whig or Liberal Prime Minister from then. And despite the many criticisms that had been made of the Tory party or the Conservatives for many years before that, it turned out that the policy adopted by the Whigs, which was a sort of a laissez-faire market, open market, turned out to be far worse. I mean, I'm not able to do justice to it because I'm not here to talk about the famine in general, but the point I'm trying to make is there was a significant change in policy from the time that Russell came in, and another key figure in all of that was where is he here? There's Russell. Is Lord Trevelyan, who, of course, the Assistant Secretary to the Treasury, and his name is notorious because it's because of the song "The Fields of Athenry." You stole Trevelyan's corn, but Trevelyan in particular had a very he was very fond of, or very prone to providential thought about Malthusian beliefs about the famine and how, what will happen, like que sera, sort of approach to the whole thing. Anyway, but when they come into office, there's less by way of, they're trying to move away from the idea of just not free food, but just resolving it by food relief. And then the other figure in this is Sir Randolph Routh, the chairman of the Irish Famine Relief Commission, another significant army figure, which this Famine Relief Commission was set up in November 1845, and he was very particular in everything he set out. Now, this is the only example that I have from the media area. Some of you may have seen this before. It's a notice of soup kitchens in Lord Caledon's estate adjoining. So the Caledon's estate adjoins the Powerscourt Estate, and here you see that soup was being dispensed from 3 local stations in December 1846, and it talks about how labourers employed at drainage. So already food relief was being connected to public works, and it talks about how soup would be given in covered cans, but they were trying to encourage useful industry among the children, and so on. So this was happening in various places. We don't have anything similar from the Powerscourt Estate or indeed other local estates that, as far as I'm aware. It has been said it's been written by some people that the Caledon Estate was maybe more positive in its response to the famine. There are comments in some of the press at the time from some letters, and particularly in the Derry Standard, which at that time was a Whig newspaper, which are very critical of the Caledon Estate. So I don't know that it was necessarily any more proactive, but I suppose the difference in this case was that Caledon was a residential landlord, and his agent Henry Prentice was maybe quicker off the block, partly maybe because of Caledon's the Lord Caledon's own closer being on site more. Now Roden himself, I talked about his self-praise. I mean, one of the things that he did talk about, he would write up and speak about this at great length, about how all the potatoes the bad potatoes, he had put them through. He had got a mill set up on machinery set up on his estate in County Down, and they used this for, I can't remember exactly how they used it, but he would often talk about in these letters or in these statements about this is the benefit of being a residential landlord. But Roden didn't seem to twig that. Yeah, he might have been a residential landlord in County Down, but he wasn't a residential landlord in any of those other places I mentioned, such as Wicklow, Dublin, Wexford, or Tyrone. Now, of course, he didn't necessarily choose that he had charge of it, but the flip side of what he's saying is that if it was so good for him to be a residential landlord in Tullymore in County Down, well then the flip side is it's not good for places like Benburb that the estate doesn't have a residential landlord. So therein lies the contradiction. And that, you can see, was a grand residence. I don't know if that's exactly how it looked, but that's how it looked at some point in the 19th century. Now, as we go to this famine relief, one of the key dynamics in famine relief in this area. I mean, this is again whistle stop through some of the key subjects, but this is the Moy Famine Relief Committee. This is signed by James Eyre Jackson, which was a well-known family. The Eyres and Jacksons had originally set up linen mills between Maydown, just outside Benburb, and Tullydewey, just outside Blackwater town. and they weren't as much involved in that enterprise by then, of course. But James Earl Jackson was the chairman of the Moy Relief Committee, and here he is a letter certifying that the soup kitchens established by the Reverend John Leach, a Protestant minister, can't remember, was he Church of Ireland or Methodist, but in Tyrone and Armagh, and how they do the great work that they were doing. Now, here is the Moy Relief Commission. So it shows you that these were based on, this is a document, Relief of the Poor. It's of 80 town lands in the parishes of Clonfecal and Killyman and Tyrone. So this is based on the local law districts. And these are the town lands in question. A population, 15,000 acres, a population of, I think that's 11,755. So it's just over 1 acre per person. Now, and here is the commission, and you can see, or sorry, here's the Moy. These committees were being set up all over Ireland. So here is the I think that's the Moy one. I think that is the Moy Relief Committee. Although the Earl of Charlemont is the Earl of Charlemont, despite the name in Armagh, he was the Lieutenant of County Tyrone. So yeah, this was for the Moy. But look at it, it's heavily dominated by clergymen, but it was clergymen of different persuasions. So you've got Church of Ireland, you've got Presbyterian, and you have Catholic as well, and you've got Walter Hoare as the estate agent, and you also have the Ayres and Jacksons associated with industry and land. And amongst others, I mean, what's really notable here for me is you have people in this who would have been bitterly opposed in political terms in the immediate years before this, and indeed during it, you could say. The Reverend Mortimer O'Sullivan, who was one of the leading sort of, he was prone to wild statements, and he was a convert. He was from, I think he was from Kerry, and he was based in Killyman at that time, and he made a lot of statements which were based on, rumours and based on hearsay, and, he was talking up, attempts to massacre the Protestant population. And then you had Michael Coyne there, who, as I said, the Catholic priest in the Moy, who had made political statements from the pulpit. So these people knew each other and didn't have at all agree. But for the purpose of this, they had to muck together. It was the local clergymen who were the main figures in this. So subscriptions were being collected. And here, for example, are the first round of subscriptions. You see the Earl of Charlemont gave £20. Thomas Eyre, the Eyre family and the Jackson family were not found wanting in their so you find that the Jackson and Ayres there have already donated £100, and then you find other people like Michael Coyne, the Catholic clergyman, £5, and so on. Henry Griffin, the Church of Ireland, £10, and there are other lists such as that. I'm not intending to go through everybody in person and give a roll call. Well, there's a few more, but you can see some of the £10, the McGees, they were around Blackwater town, £10, and so on. And there you find the Lord Primate, the Church of Ireland Archbishop. I think that's £10 is the figure that he's given, but of course he's giving to many different estates and other local relief committees. And there you saw the Earl of Roden himself gives 50. And there indeed is his donation, as signed by the Reverend John Leach, to say that Walter Hoare, on behalf of the Powerscourt Estate, had in December 1846 given £50 to famine relief. And this is the similar one for Charlemont, because this covers the adjoining part of Armagh. And there you have some of the same figures. Is that the same? Sorry, that's the Moy again. Pardon me. This has been replicated. But here's the Charlemont. Here's the Charlemont Relief Commission. 49 town lands, and in many cases, a lot of these seem to be suffering worse. And some of the same figures, though. You see Griffin and you see O'Sullivan and so on. So pretty much a huge overlap in personnel between them. And what's interesting is that the chairman of this commission, Thomas Eyre, he was the Eyre was actually of English birth. There were English people in Ireland who were doing their best to resolve the famine, or to relieve the famine, despite I suppose obviously what have very often been highlighted as cruel governmental policies. So here's the relief fund. Some of their this is a fascinating document from December 1846. Look at the wording of this appeal. The labouring poor in the Charlemont Relief District are supported chiefly by weaving, and the high prices of provisions, combined with the small and decreasing wages for their labour, owing to the fall in the price of linens, has reduced them to very great distress. It doesn't mention anything about famine. It doesn't mention anything about potatoes or potato disease. It's just saying linens and wages and provisions. And but there you are. You see Trinity College. Why is Trinity College at the top of that list? Because Trinity College owns some of the lands which are known as college land beside Charlemont, or maybe including Charlemont. I'm not quite sure of the exact mapping of it, but you can see quite a few military personnel also there, as well as some of the figures that we've seen as being involved in both those local relief committees. Now, James R. Jackson, as I said, of who was the chairman of the Moy Relief Commission, here you see James R. Jackson going that extra mile to try and persuade Randolph Routh in Dublin Castle to give James R. Jackson actually stepped into the role after. Sorry, we talked about the death of a member of the committee. That was his own cousin, John Eyre, died suddenly in January 1847. But he's asking for sort of in the basic terms, he's asking Randolph Routh, can they deviate from the rules and regulations of this, and not make, there are very tight regulations about how they could give, what they would have to charge for it and how they would have to charge for it. And it seemed to those most closely involved at local level, this was not helping those people who needed it most. I'm summarising very basically here, but Randolph Routh was not easily moved on those matters, despite James Jackson's pleas. Here's an example. We don't have much evidence of this. There's been a lot of work done on workhouses recently, historical work that is. And for example, Dungannon Workhouse has done a great project about its history, not just during the famine. We don't have a lot of evidence about people going to the workhouse, but here's one receipt from the Powerscourt Estate papers, which are in the National Library of Ireland, which is a receipt for. It's even in its basic terms, you can just picture the scene. The drawing of Betty Conlon to the workhouse and fare of her child to Newry. So you can see a mother and her child being separated, one going to the workhouse, which was grim. Many people did not come out of the workhouse a lot alive. And I don't have any more details about her, but she's been separated from her child in December 1846. So clearly, I've only found written evidence of a handful of other people. There's maybe 3 or 4 mentioned on the Dungannon Workhouse website. There were a small number there may have been more. I can't find them right now.
Dónal, can I ask?
Yes.
Sorry, it says our Betty. Sorry, just go back. Betty, it said, and to workhouse and fare of her child to Newry. What does that mean? So her child was been sent to Newry.
I think this is being taken in a carriage I think that they're being taken. I think this is basically being taken by horse or by whatever form of transport to those places, but they're being separated.
Okay, so we're not sure where the child was going, but obviously been taken to Newry. Yeah.
Maybe some, I don't know, an orphanage. I'm not. That's not an area of expertise for me, but
yeah, no.
Certainly being separate from other. Yeah.
George, can you add to that? Would you have any idea?
Well, there was a workhouse in Newry as well,
Okay.
but I can't imagine why a mother and daughter would have been separated like that. Maybe the child was going from Newry Port, might have been being sent out to relatives in England or whatever, But it's unusual that you would see that.
Maybe there was an illness. I don't know. Yeah.
Could may well be, but I mean, it's just it's unusual for separation like that. There was separation within the workhouses anyway, but the families would normally have gone in as a unit and then been separated within the confines of the workhouse.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll speed on here as far as I can get here. Yeah. So there's the plaque that the local historical society, English Historical Society, was the one at that time that had the funding, so they put it up. Even though it's in Benburb, that my father and others had put up on the old Powerscourt Arms Hotel, which is now around the bottle of Benburb pub. This was a site where it was served during the Great Famine. I don't agree with the years on that, by the way. I wouldn't have agreed with those years being put in this, because the famine didn't stop in 1847 at all. But anyway. But I question whether it was. There's not enough evidence for me to be utterly convinced it was all or partially being served from the Arms Hotel. The only written evidence I found in the Powerscourt Estate papers, though, it was being served from Benjamin Beattie's house on the main street, which I think was around the middle of the map here. It was so. I'll run on now. This is fascinating insight into thinking at the time as well. As the famine wore on, if we can even remember in our own lifetimes, or many of you, I'm sure, can remember the great enthusiasm for Band-Aid and Live Aid and all those. And then And subsequently, why do these things not? Well, people talk about famine fatigue. Well, famine fatigue, such as it is in terms of in charitable terms, is something that didn't just exist in recent times. Um, and as the famine went on a couple of years, indeed like a war, people begin to say, well, how can we, we can't just get, there was this fear of welfarism that they would that whatever money they had, that the people who had money, they would it'd be just completely given away, and they'd have nothing less themselves, and it would actually only encourage people not to work and so on. I mean, basic terms, that's what it is. But you see evidence of this whenever Dr. Francis Clark is leaving Benburb as a medical doctor from the and it talks about it talks about how he combined. There's Reverend Henry Griffin as the chairman of this the dispensary, talking about how he combined economy with charity. The economy was equally, if not more important than the charity, and it goes more. It talks about how being humane and charitable to the destitute and the famishing, that no individual would be allowed to perish from want, but again, that it wouldn't be squandered in supplying the demands of others who are under no extraordinary pressure. This was always foremost in mind. Unfortunately, this is really there's not really much other written evidence about what was done through Benburb Dispensary. It's strangely elusive, and this would be very important evidence if I could find any more as to the serving of food and the state of the local people who are being served. Now, I have something else in that, but it's not direct evidence related to this. It's not as much sort of testimony on this state. Now, quickly, soup kitchens, peak supplies per district. So look at this. This affects both sides of the border. Sorry, this is section some of the areas, both sides of the border. So I have just done statistics. So of 4,729 people in the Benburb district, 772 were being given supplies at peak in the summer of 1847. So that's 16.32% of the local population were getting food from soup kitchens. Significant figure. More than any of the other adjoining areas, except for the Brantry area, where in terms of percentage, but it was the greatest. But it had a bigger number of people in Benburb, and it was a village, whereas the Brantry was a totally rural area. But look at this compared to Armagh. The Armagh figures are much greater. Look at that. Armagh city itself, 25.27%, more than a quarter. Similar figures in Middletown, Charlemont. Brutally, which is actually around between Tynan and Madden, I think, 42.4%. Okay, a smaller population, but still almost double the number of people not in Benburb. So Benburb was high in the southeast Tyrone context, but when you look at the other side of the Blackwater, the figures were actually bigger in several instances.
And just to say, that's for people who don't know, that's quite a small geographical distance, really.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
For such disparity in numbers of need.
I'm only given a small number of places there to, because you could bombard you with figures there and you'd lose yourself in where they all are. But this is on the Benburb Field Hospital or Temporary Hospital that was set up, the Moyen Benburb set up in 1847, and they're talking about having 40 patients in that time, 2 nurses and 1 ward maid. And you can see some of the figures from those figures from elsewhere in Ireland. But if you look at that, the Dungarvan one is clearly County Waterford, and the Aglish is not Aglish at Tyrone, that's Aglish in maybe Dungarvan district. But if you look at that there are more people in the Moyen Benburb Temporary Hospital, 40, than there are in Dungannon, 25, and more than in Dockmore. So there's another symptom of people being worse afflicted. Among the many other things that the state was doing at this time, this was the idea was helping people to improve, getting some form of work. There were labouring schemes. People were digging trenches, digging roads, or building new roads, draining fields, to improve the land. One of the other things to do that was given out by the estate and other estates was barrels of lime by the thousand. So here's 8,500 barrels of lime being given out to tenants in May 1847 to keep their houses. Death by starvation. We don't have a lot of reports of death from the famine in this area, and indeed this isn't strictly speaking on the Powerscourt Estate. It's just over the river in the townland of Eden Derry, which is a few hundred yards from the village of Benburb, not even, you could say, just on the other side of the Blackwater. And this is very graphic in the small distance. John Eyre, whom I mentioned before, the Eyre family, a large farmer, This man was working in a ploughed field, and he was from the neighbouring area, and it appeared that he was on his way to work for Mr. at the time when he sank from hunger, yeah, he died of destitution. This is reported in January 1847. These are things that are drawn from I mentioned the Powerscourt Estate papers, which start in 1847 in earnest. Or sorry, these minute books do. So this is the labour, talked about the work schemes. This is an example of receipts that were given. So Captain well, it says Cranfield, but he was gone by then. Robert Wilson, whom I mentioned, is signing this. So this is the employment of labouring poor at drainage in March 1847. The labouring schemes were at their high point in that late 1846, early 1847 period. And lots of people were employed in them. Here's another form of labouring scheme that was done: wages for bog watching. I presume this is to watch that people wouldn't be stealing turf around that time. And this is also on the estate at Knocknacloy, at the edge of the estate towards the Brantry. And then you have, look at this for a scheme. This is one that's of intrigue to anybody. Oh, sorry, that shouldn't be there. This is something that we have intrigued anybody who lives around the present, lives in the Eglish area of Tyrone, within the estate. This was an attempt for a labouring scheme to reroute the Una River. It's a very bendy river, and they were going to spend huge amount of effort to straighten out this river. I don't think from comparing the maps of the time they ever went ahead with it, but it was a very ambitious scheme to even consider. So there's another thing drawn from Famine Relief Commission papers, which is to do with the amounts collected for poor rent for famine relief in April to September 1847, and you can see there that I talked about that figure, 770 supplied with food. When the rations were ceased in September 1847, there were still 582 people getting soup. And the amount of food that was donated, money that was donated, £215, which is a higher amount donated than in most of the other areas nearby. In fact, it's only the second highest figure donated, and lo and behold, where's the other biggest figure donated? It's in the Moy next door. There is so that's, yeah, they're constructing a terrace. Is that at the agent's house? There you are. So now distress notices as you get into the second half of the famine. Now, forget the 1850 dates and that. As we got into what we would consider the second half of the famine, from what we know now, policy was beginning to change. Estates such as Powerscourt were realising, look, we're not getting rents paid. This can't go on in perpetuity. This famine, when's it going to end? So they start thinking more of people having to be perfed out, evicted. So this is an example of a distress notice that was issued. It was a warning to people. This was issued from later, but this was the sort of thing that was being given to tenants from 1847 in particular. What have I got in Roden here? Roden's policy himself was beginning to change. Roden, as the famine himself, he went off from having in the early part of the famine in his public speeches talking about, realising that people needed to be helped in their destitution. His speeches changed from that, and this is indeed a lot of the establishment in Ireland. They're moving away from thinking about charitable as their charitable emphasis. They're thinking, no, we need to actually move away from welfarism. The landlord classes are beginning to collapse. We won't be able to do this. Law and order is beginning to break down, and then talking up calamity of every sort that was going to visit the land. And I know we have to finish them. Just a couple of points. I would make that you may have heard the comment made often. Sure, look at look at all the Catholic church buildings during that time. Why did they not do more for the famine? Which is a very crude sort of comment, because the reason why there was so much church building going on in that time, well, it was an accelerated thing that happened after Catholic emancipation. Church building had begun to become legal again from the 1790s to some extent, but it accelerated after Catholic emancipation, so it was going to happen anyway. And I suppose what you actually find is, why do you find like this is Blackwater town, Clonfeacle Church on the Tyrone side, just of the village? Why are churches like this being built or rebuilt at that time? Well, it seems that people were willing. They didn't, in terms of community leaders. I've talked about the political role that priests were playing at that time, but it seems also that the humanitarian role they were playing. They were involved in obviously in local committees. people were involved. They looked to God. One of the comments made in the Catholic press at that time was, why is there such a low rate of suicide in Ireland despite these calamities? And look at England, there's a much higher rate of suicide. I mean, I'm only articulating what's said in in the Newry Examiner, for example, and they said that it's that even the lowliest pauper in his hour of need knows that he can go to his local Sargat or Rune, and that he can seek solace and look to God. And it's this role that was way beyond ordinary ministry that that priests were performing during this time, that certainly it wasn't a cause that we can see evidence of any animosity between flock and priests about the building of any churches or indeed any parochial houses. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't, but it doesn't seem to, I haven't seen any evidence in this area, for example, despite the fact that there's at least one church being built, there's a parochial house being built in Eglish in the late 1840s and so on. So this is another dynamic which has been commented on, but that's just what I would say about it. I'm conscious of the fact we're only halfway through the famine here and it's 8:15. What do we do, Dolores and Jared?
Jared, Jared?
I'm here, yeah.
Are you happy enough to stay on?
Well, I'll stay on, absolutely.
Oh, sure,
yeah.
we'll stay on. Yeah, we'll
Right,
continue.
I'll stay on and I'll try and be as quick as I can.
Yeah, we're
Right.
going to stay on, Dónal. Yeah,
Okay.
sure. Listen, the thing is too, this is being recorded, so if people, people can pick it up later, or so don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, pardon all the ad-libbing I'm doing then. Any ad-libbing I'm doing that's incorrect, please. I'm not operating from notes here, so don't hold it against me, anything that I said that's ever deviates from the exact
Actually, just
figures.
can I ask a question, Dónal, to both you and Jared? We're talking here about some of the issues going on in the States and maybe the relief, and some people are asking, would have been quite similar in other states. It was really, could have been quite different from state to state. Some people have asked here, like, would have been a similar history associated with Brownlow Estate and, for example, Ranfurly Estate as well.
Jared's better placed to answer that.
It differs from a state. It's like when you're, as Dónal, who's a vast amount of knowledge of that particular area, when you're looking at, you're looking at counties, you're looking at artificial boundaries. And when you're looking at provinces, you're looking at artificial boundaries, So, like, for example, South Donegal has much more in common with North Leitrim than it does with, North Donegal. And the Brownlow Estate, there's very, very little available. When I was working on the Lurgan book, it wasn't a good source at all. There's the Duke of Manchester's estate, which was around Portadown, again, North Armagh, not a million miles from where Dónal's talking about. I always remember coming across a roll of names, hundreds and hundreds of names. There's not a year on it. There's nothing to specify what it is. And it's just, you're really reliant on what's there. Dónal's mine stuff in the National Library. I've come across material where it's just you get the box out and it says uncatalogued material. I knew a librarian in the National Library who a few years ago, he says we're starting to look at boxes that were submitted in the 1950s. So there's still material out there, but it's really potluck. If you get the likes of the Caledon estate, and you've got a good agent who's writing letters, the likes of Prentice. Also there was John Henry Porter around Portadown who was writing letters as well. But you're really at the mercy of the sources. So, but it did differ. I mean, where Dónal's talking about there in Charlemont, that side, and actually, like, I was in the Moy there last week up in the Randale, Dónal, and you wouldn't know that you were moving from the Moy into Charlemont. It's one continuous road. Just you just step into it. But in that area, I found reference to where there was an absentee landlord who they reckon actually was a Quaker, which is highly unusual given the work they did during the famine throughout the country. And they said it was full of tenants who had nobody to look to, who were just living in dire poverty. So it just depends on who the landlord was. And as Dónal referenced earlier on, if they were resident, and that's one of the things you find in the letters to the Relief Commission and various societies, that they'll say, the Church of Ireland ministers, and John Leach, Dónal was Church of Ireland, very prominent in that area, and they're saying we don't have resident gentry here. We don't have somebody to show example to the people, to lead the people, and that's a very common thing throughout the literature in that period. So it differed from estate to state, from area to area, from county to county.
Yeah. Well, look, I'll rattle on here. I'm conscious of I don't
Yeah,
want to.
sorry.
I'll try. I promise those listening patiently. I'll try and get through the issues here as quickly as I can, and there'll be a few interesting sidelights before we finish. So the reason I put up this here, I go back to the Una Bridge near Benburb, just a mile from my home place. Fascinating history. 12th of July 1847. The Orange Order. I talked about the local Orange, the strength, and why is it? Why does this matter so much? Well, you have to bear in mind that the Orange Order. People talk about Loughgall, and it's not that far away. But Benburb and the Dian are very key, and the Dian, which is a hamlet about 4 miles, 4 or 5 miles from Benburb. Some of the key figures in the foundation of the Orange Order, sorry, were from there, and that's why some of the early patent warrant numbers of the first Orange lodges were there. So this was very historically significant, and the people of that time were aware of it. And so you find that in the summer of 1847, the Orange Order in various parts of Ulster is making a decision. This is a very bad time in the country. Are we going to parade? And in some areas, including, for example, in County Monaghan, they made the decision not to parade. But in Benburb, they did parade. At this stage, the parades were legal again, I think. They were legal, yes. And so this is a brief police report of that. But it talks about, I think it's a crowd of about 50 men parading through the village at that time. But I suppose, is this just as some people are critical of the Orange Order, would they simply say, oh, this is just, triumphalism or what? You have to appreciate there are other factors here as well that, these are, to some extent, there's an element of fraternal solidarity in this. Some of them are from the small landlord classes, or not landlord, sorry, small to large farmer classes. I'm sorry, simplifying, but that they feel that their position in society is under threat, that they could be losing out, and in a way, it's a sort of it's a distraction for one day. It's something that takes their minds off it for a few brief hours. A little bit of a celebration is in among these dark times or difficult times. So there was a social element to it, but in some areas they didn't think it necessary to parade in that year, but they did do it here. But that again may reflect local tensions more than anything. Now, so this is, I think this is fascinating as well. This is March 1847, Dungannon Agricultural Society. Another thing where you had maybe people of a similar social class having some form of social interaction. And there were several local local farmers, involved in this, such as Joseph Kidd, Walter Hoare himself, Robert Wilson. There he is again, engineer to the Board of Public Works. And you find a number of local farmers who are in this and entering competitions or winning competitions, including Thomas Henry Harper, maybe one of the largest farmers near the Moy, and Henry Shillington, and so on. So this is going on. No, there was something the point I wanted to make will arise subsequently, but this is another form of social thing that brought people together who were not suffering the worst of it, but nonetheless they appreciated the solidarity of their class. Where are we? Sorry, this is not playing ball for me. Yeah. Now, as you enter 1848, another thing, and this was spoken of very much by people like Earl of Roden, this fear of rebellion. You have across continental Europe, you have uprising in Paris and so on, and you have the Chartists in England, and then you have the growth of the Young Ireland movement, which was beginning to eclipse which was sort of who were the Young Turks who were sort of stealing. Daniel O'Connell had died in 1847, and in his absence, with his departure, the huge, a bit like Parnell later time, without O'Connell, that huge surge that had been for a particular cause was lost, or not lost, sorry, but the momentum was lost. There was no one significant figurehead leader to replace him. And Young Ireland then was a growing movement, slightly more radical, and people like Thomas Davis and Gavin Duffy and Dillon, and they published the Nation newspaper, and there was again the idea that there was secret activity was going on around Ireland was becoming very strong, and of course this is the 50th anniversary of the United Irishmen's Rising of 1798. And there's an example of a pike that's referred to in a lot of reports of 1848, a lot of reports that emphasise, oh, people are being armed around the country. Like Roden was prone to make a lot of statements about this in the Lords and other people in the press, that there was secret plans being made, plotting to cause another uprising, and it was going to be very bloody. And this, for example, would have been made on the occasion of Orange meetings and so on. And look at this, March 1848, 623 Benburb men, able and willing men in Benburb. Did you know there were 623 able and willing men in Benburb? Maybe there were more then, I don't know. But they're all residents on the manor of Benburb of the estate of the Viscount Powerscourt, and this had been forwarded to Walter Hoare. I can't help but wonder, did Walter Hoare have a part in this statement? We, the inhabitants of the manor of Benburb, have witnessed with much alarm the repeal efforts and the attempt to extinguish the Constitution itself, and we declare in the fullest manner our inviolable allegiance to the most gracious sovereign. And they're basically saying that if called upon by government, we'll give our personal assistance in support to the civil power. Now, they weren't unique in this. There was a similar statement from the Orangemen of Anahoe, which is in the Aughnacloy direction, not far away, and also from the Ranfurly estate in Dungannon. Nonetheless, it's quite a statement that says 623. I mean, did they all just volunteer this of their own volition? I can't help but wonder, did Walter Hoare, as the agent, organise this, and was this being done to please the man who was essentially his master, Roden, who was talking up rebellion? And was this demonstration of loyalty by these tenants? Was this regarded as that they would keep in his favour? There's dynamics like this to consider. And then you have in May 1848. Now this is the other factor that was very much a cause of fear to the landlord classes, and that was the growth of the tenant right movement. And this was the mass Ulster meeting. The mass Ulster meeting that took place in May 1848 actually took place in Dungannon. And look at this fascinating report that appears in there. There are other occasional reports in the nationalist press of Ireland talking about the Powerscourt Estate and how the Catholics would face discrimination. They couldn't build a church here, or they couldn't do that, or they would face. Sometimes I don't know how true they all were. How much of it was based on supposition or based on some genuine experience. But again, this is a comment based on that Dungannon meeting, that these were people coming from all over Ulster. And the Reverend James Coyne, the curate in English, actually seconded the motion, which was proposed by William Sharman Crawford of North Down, Protestant. But here you have a Catholic priest seconding it. It shows that there's a prospect of cross-community movement for tenant right gaining momentum. And this is obviously close to the area that this meeting is Dungannon. And look at this comment: threats, misrepresentation, and foul devices of every kind were put into play to prevent people from attending. This is particularly the case with regard to the estates and tenantry of Lords Ranfurly and Powerscourt. So you'd have to wonder if this is to some extent true, and it's quite specific in saying that. Was this being organised by or being enacted by? You've seen how they put an armed guard outside the church, and they told people how to vote according to different. So was this being done through the agent of the estate and the bailiffs and so on? It's a fascinating comment anyway. And so even though the famine is still raging, people have other concerns as well. And look at this. This is a man called Richard Dowse, who was in the Moy in August 1840. This is not when this is a portrait of him as an older man. August 1848. He's on a visit to the Moy. He's originally from Dungannon. He's a student at Trinity College at that time, although obviously not when he's got this beard, this grey beard. But he, do I have all the details of me? He was visited by the police. There's a police file made on him because he had with him, or somewhere along the line, he had picked up a pike, which was regarded as, which he explained as having been a souvenir that we picked up in Dublin as a sort of almost like an antiquity. They said, oh no, there's rumours of a rebellion in Ireland, and they were investigating him. And anyway, this man went on to become was he a King's Counsel and so on. He ended up becoming anything but, I haven't got all his details, became anything but a rebel in any sense or shape or form. But the very fact of him being in Dublin, visiting the Moy on the summer holidays, and having this object, there was anybody who visited the area, including people who were visiting from other countries, found themselves under particular suspicion at that time, including people who came from America. Now, and another example of how it wasn't all just the famine in people's mind. the burning of the Lundy took place, not for the first time, but this is a particular graphic demonstration of it, in December in 1848 in Benburb, a shutting of the Gates Party. Now, when the Lundy was burned in a place like Benburb, it wasn't just done as an annual ritual. You tend to find that it was done as a way of sending a statement to local landlords or MPs, by way of demonstrating who they were loyal to, but also who they were displeased with, directly or indirectly. And so this took place in Mr. Whittle's pub, which is now the same side as the Bottle of Benburb, and talks about their highly honoured Lord of the Soil, Powerscourt, and his worthy agent, Walter Hoare. So you can still see this sense of the Orange men and the being very closely aligned with them. Now, but look what you have in January 1849. You have Drummond, a corn mill, being set on fire. And this is not an isolated incident. You find a lot of places going on fire around that time around the countryside, and this seems to be in some form of protest, maybe about the way maybe millers being greedy or allegedly greedy, or something to do with the distribution. But did this happen spontaneously? It was spontaneously. Did this just? It seems that it was a case of arson, and it's not a unique incident. So again, it's another form of maybe agrarian agitation. And what have we got here? This is the rental losses are stacking up, £777 to November 1848. So by the autumn winter of 1848, estates like the Powerscourt Estate saying, right, this is it. They've already sort of set their minds saying, we're going to get rid of tenants who can't pay. So they're well past charitable. They're well past sort of, threatening. It's time for action. They're going to get rid of these tenants who can't pay, and they're crippling the estate by their inability to pay. There's the Famine Relief Orphan Scheme. I just mentioned this because many people from the Armagh district, including what's now called Tullysaran or Agdish Armagh or Tirani, went on this to Australia. Many young girls went on this to Australia with the Earl Grey scheme, or in the early part of 1849. And now look at this figure. Look at this. This is something else. You can't really see this in its full detail, but this is a document from, this is part of a document from the Powerscourt Estate papers, which describes how various residents were being evicted or sent to America, sent to about the rents they hadn't paid. And interestingly, some of these same people had been doing labouring jobs on the estate. You can find them in the receipts or in the payment books of the estate from the previous years. But a lot of these people sent to America, evicted, and so on. So this was really escalated during that 1848-1849 period. And look at this. Finally, the estate decides we're going to do something about this. So it's not unique. But what they did was, in some estates, they actually organised ships to go out. They booked ships specifically for this. From the advertisements that appeared beforehand, it seems to me that the Powerscourt Estate, through Walter Hoare, did not book a ship specifically. They availed of ships that were already going to go out, and they booked for over 200 families to go out on two ships, the Elizabeth and the Sarah Thompson, or Helen Thompson, in the spring of 1849. And the reason, how can I say that? Well, this is a general advertisement that appeared. This is not booked by the Powerscourt Estate. This is just a general promotion for these departures. But they decided, look, we're going to have to move people out. We're going to have to clean things up around here. We're going to have to consolidate farms. We're going to have to get tenants paying their rents, and things will improve from there. And note the reference there to the American and English laws about the food provisions and breadstuffs and water. It's important, we talk about coffin ships. Clearly there were ships on which some people died, many people died, either on ship or shortly after reaching land in America. But it is probably fair to say that the coffin ships and the worst were ships that were going to British North America or Canada in 1847. And by this stage, by the time these ships are leaving with over 200 families from Benburb, Powerscourt Estate, and a similar ship was going from the Charlemont Estate, Armagh, to Australia, a large number of families were going from there, including distant relatives of my own family, from the Charlemont Estate and Armagh, that these these were not ships on which lots of people were dying. These were not what we would consider coffin ships today, although of course the conditions were not pleasant. The very term coffin ship itself would be contested by some people in terms of the full extent of the famine and how prevalent they were. Clearly there were some, but we're not talking about dozens of people living in Benburb and dying on these ships. Unfortunately, we don't have a record of who left. We only have a record of who arrived in America. But there is the report that appeared, and it's done very much with a positive spin, as you might say, in the April of 1849, talks about how the trustees of the estate of Powerscourt have on these, Elizabeth and Helen Thompson, of 200 small farmers and their families being able to support themselves. These are probably not the cottier classes, note. Who these people, now some of these people didn't want to leave, but you could say a lot of them did want to leave. It was an opportunity for them. It was, this new frontier, and it's very much highlights how Walter Hoare was giving these people their money, their clothes, that they would be amply provided with provisions, there would money and gold, and all highly praising of Robert Wilson of Benburb. That man, again, look at what this man's doing. This man is involved in every aspect of life in Benburb during the famine, and he provided them with everything necessary for the journey. And note, about 30 or 40 others from the same estate will shortly be sent out. Now, I don't know if they did. There's no similar report that I can find, but it's likely that it's true, and that this shows that the policy of clearing people from the land if they weren't paying would continue. And here are some of the actual documents that exist from America of these ships. They don't tell us a lot. They just give us the names, ages, sex, and in some cases it gives the occupation. But there you are. A lot of these typically are large families. 7, 6 children, 5 children, 4 children. These are just some examples. But you don't actually know in every instance. It doesn't say the relationship between them all. So in some cases, we have different generations. It's not always clear where they're uncles and nephews and nieces and so on. And there's the Elizabeth. You actually have occupations in that. So you have farmers listed and you have labourers listed as well. Note that name Abraham Wiley, because before I finish, I just want to say something about him when I get there. Here's some of these names left the air. Now, the problem we have is because this was a general ship or general ships, it doesn't say their addresses. So I'm only putting in the names of families. Some of these seem to resonate on local level. Some of them may have been local, but never left the area in that moment. Some of them may have been people from Belfast or nearby or some other area who just happened to get the same ship. These are just lists of some of these. There's a few of these people, like you can see a name like Daly, you'd have to suspect that these were local people, but we don't have enough to state that categorically. So I've attempted in some cases to match these up with people I can find, but John Quinn, for example, is a common name. You couldn't be certain. Hugh Dónal, similar. I've talked about the ships. Look at this. So this is after the ship is gone. May 1849, Armagh Guardian, sign of the times in the district between Napa and Benburb. So Napa or Drumsallen on the road between Dungannon or English, Tyrone and Armagh, or what people will call Tullysarn as well now. About 3 miles, no less than 7 townlands, covering an area of 1,000 acres, totally unoccupied. Totally unoccupied. Some 2 or 3 years ago, this same district was inhabited by a comparatively wealthy population. This is like our brethren south and west, who were not actually elected of all the wasteland themselves. This is the baneful effects of legislative blundering, increasing our taxation while decreasing our means of paying it, and beginning to exhibit themselves in the Black North. And so there you are across the Blackwater. It would seem, going by that it was that area that's known as, I say, Napa, Drumsallen, English, Armagh and Tullysarn, that was actually worse affected than Benburb and so on in that anecdote. But I don't think that's entirely true, because I don't think any of those I don't think you had 7 townlands entirely unoccupied. The figures don't bear that out. Look at this. 1849, as it goes on, you find increasing stories. You have to read between the lines to get a measure of people's desperation. In this case, it's a little bit more graphic. When you see in quarterly court reports, you see references to the profound extent of theft that was going on. And in this case, you find, for example, 2 men being apprehended on the bridge between the Moy and Charlemont, or Charlemont Bridge, and they had in bags, they were heavily laden, and they were traced, these men, with having a significant weight of beef and 5 butchers' knives, and it appears that they were carrying, this was the meat that they had killed a cow on the land, just killed it there and then, torn it apart violently, as it says in the report, and they were imprisoned for this. That's one example. You find many other reports, and there's an example. There's a report of from the police of theft in Wilson's shop by persons unknown, and arrests being carried out. Look at this. The examples of these are local townlands. I wouldn't all expect you to know, but for example, you have down here Sierra, which is in the Powerscourt Estate, stealing the door of a house, stealing potatoes, knocking a cloy nearby. You have. And there you have a McAnallen. I don't know if there's relations. He was stealing hens at Tullylearn, which is also on the estate. 1 day's imprisonment. But some people are, for example, for breaking and robbing a house, given transported for 10 years. 10 years, presumably to Van Diemen's Land or somewhere like that. And you'd have to ask the question, in some cases, well, this was intended, in some cases, did people engage in these in theft? Did they actually want to be sent abroad? And did in some cases the magistrates send them abroad to give them? Did they get? I mean, that's just a thought that occurs, to give them a new opportunity. And look at this. I realise we'll have to draw to a close shortly. But this is fascinating. Abraham Wiley. I mentioned him in particular as the name of one of those on one of those ships that left at the expense of the Powerscourt Estate in spring of 1849. Look at this. In September 15th. So one of the things that was going on at this precise time in September, the payment of rents was due so shortly, and the crops were to be harvested, and a practice known as cropping was taking place around Ireland, particularly in the south and west, and this was being criticised or being highlighted in the conservative press in Ulster as an example of lawlessness and the untrustworthiness of the peasant classes and secret societies and so on, and also in South Ulster. But look at this. What's happened? Abraham Wiley, is he in America? Well, Mr. Abraham Wiley, a farmer in Goristown, that's misspelt, Culrevig and Bruchadui, near the Moy, on this estate, they cut down the large body of Orange men, cut down 50 acres of prime oats as a mark of respect. What does a mark of respect mean? Does it mean he's dead? I don't think so. I don't have any evidence that he was. And then they went to Mr. William Wiley's house with all their banners, music, and insignia, and they had a substantial dinner. And then it seems to have adopted the procedures of an Orange meeting, and with great hilarity. But is this a case of cropping taking place? Did Abraham Wiley, was this premeditated? Did he take advantage of the scheme from the Powerscourt Estate to go to America, knowing that he wouldn't be able to keep up? Had he fallen into arrears? Was there, I mean, I'm only speculating here, but it's fascinating. How could, and at this very same time when cropping is being condemned in other parts of Ireland, you find this taking place. It just so happened that Walter Hoare was getting married, was on his honeymoon around that time. Was there some connivance here? Was Walter Hoare aware of it? I don't know. It's hard to do justice to it, but there's something intriguing going on there. Many subplots to this time. I can't conclude this subject without talking briefly about Dolly's Bray, which has been immortalised in song, Loyalist or Orange song, but it was a scene of a massacre that when Orange men went to Earl of Roden's estate on the 12th of July 1849. Roden had been again agitating about rebellion and all these things, and on the way back they went over a very rugged hilly area, Dolly's Bray. There was a skirmish. The Orange men who had arms with them with muskets, they opened fire, and it's disputed the exact number of figures, but it could have been in the 20s, as high as in the 20s. And Earl of Roden, although he wasn't even present at that skirmish, ended up getting the blame for it, and he had a huge fall from grace that he ended up losing a lot of his privilege and influence within politics and society. And although he was still obviously a landlord, he had a fall from grace. And although Dolly's Bray is celebrated in some songs, Roden was reviled for his perceived part in and almost in marching these Orange men up the hill, as it were. And the rental losses they didn't stop. I mean, I suppose the point is we have a plaque there that says 1847. The rental losses continued to pile up for the next few years. And here's Captain Cranfield saying in August 1849, thrown tenants. Here's what they've paid, but look at the amount that is owed or lost. And Cranfield actually has just visited in 1849 from Wicklow, where he's still based at this stage, having left Benburb a few years ago. Bad crops this year, price is ruinous, and recommends with Mr. Hoare a discount to allow to the tenants, and as some of the other Tyrone landlords have done, and so on. So this was done for a couple of years. But look at this, Robert Wilson, this man who was all those different things he talked about, and the man who saw those people off to the port on their ships, basically made sure they didn't abscond, gave them their gold, gave them their clothes, gave them their provisions, had been the main man in Benburb to a large extent, or in terms of businessman and engineer. Suddenly, going out, it said that there were people working on at the Flax near the Blackwater River, August 1850. He drowns. And it was a hot day, apparently. He drowns. He went for a swim. He left behind him a wife and some accounts say 10 children. He wasn't an old man. He might only have been in his, I can't remember exactly, I have it somewhere in his 40s. His father died 10 days later. This is a dirge that appeared in the Newry Telegraph, celebrating the man and his life and the tragedy of his loss. But one wonders, and we can only wonder, I've come out with a little bit of speculation here. Did he drown? Did he lose himself, as that's reported? He had gone through a lot of difficult times during this, even though he wasn't among the pauper class at all. He had seen a lot of difficult things in his time during the previous 5 years. One wonders. I can only wonder. Pardon me for speculating. There is one of the few famine. It's not a famine memorial, but it's a memorial from that time. There is the monument, a very grand monument to Robert Wilson in the Church of Ireland in Benburb, in the graveyard, and the rent reductions continued in 1850 for similar reasons. So they say the famine's not in 1849. Really, it's look at this account from Reverend Michael Coyne in the Moy in February 1851. So graphic. He's writing a letter complaining about the orange processions. But look at this depiction. He says, picture the scene that people in the late hour of the night coming into the Moy on business, perhaps of great importance, and so on, and then throughout the county, a poor fatigued Roman Catholic priest coming from a house call, a sick call, where perhaps the inmates of the house he had visited had nothing to eat but a cold raw turnip. Isn't that such a graphic description just of how people were living in 1851, written at the time? People on the sick calls had a cold raw turnip on which to survive. And this was supposed to be after the famine, the comedy they used was supposed to be over. The famine didn't fully end then. There's just an account of the attempt to bring a little bit more prosperity to people. 1852, distributing a flaxseed, and I will have to draw a close in a moment. And here it is. Rental discounts were withdrawn. So from 1852, they had to pay full rent again. The patience and tolerance of the estate had ended there. That they had the audacity to protest about some things. And Walter Hoare said, well, it said, that no more reductions, and this is what the estate granted. It's worth noting that the estate, when they did a stock take of their wine in their headquarters in Wicklow, found that they had hundreds and hundreds of bottles of different types of wine that had been undrunk, and some of them had been completely spoiled. So they hadn't dispensed with all their resources anyway. And look at this, just as a sort of a footnote to this, you find that the whole idea of eviction and forced departure continues, and maybe this is where you can see. I do not find, if anybody you can imagine, the whole question of superism. Superism did exist in parts of Ireland during or after the famine. It may have existed at some stage in Ulster. I'm not authoritative enough on that subject to say, but one might think, given the level of criticism and revilement that was sent in the direction of the Earl of Roden, that if anybody was going to espouse or practice superism, that is, convert to get your soup to Protestantism, that he would be an exponent of it. But I don't find any evidence of that, and indeed the Protestant ministers who dispensed soup locally did not make it a condition. They were very proactive in that regard in the 1846, 7, 8 period. But you do find questions that arise that the different treatment of tenants in the 1850s, you find that some tenants who seem to have been Catholic seemed to be treated differently from others who maybe had worked for the estate in some shape or form. So they weren't being given dispensations that others. So there's a man in his old age, would have fallen into distress, and he was not. He was over 70, and he was not. He was not allowed a pension. But whereas Mr. Samuel Kempston was, and James Dónal was refused in Colrevog. So famine memorials, we don't really have many at all, but here they are indirectly. In English Catholic Church, the Reverend James Coyne died from an ailment in 1852 after visiting a house. It seems that he got ill after visiting a sick call. And I can't but wonder, he was only ever humble curate, as this suggests. He was never parish priest. And yet he has a monument inside the church that is not... There are many parish priests that never got in the subsequent years. And one wonders, is this an acknowledgement of his role during the 1840s? Perhaps on a political level and in the famine, we can only wonder. And here's a similar one to Canon Michael Coyne in the Moy, who lasted until 1845, but he was the man who was in that parish through all the 1840s. And James R. Jackson has no such monument. He died a bachelor in 1862, and there's no monument apart from maybe a small one in the Church of Ireland, but not on the grand scale. The Earl of Roden lived to a grand age. He is now remembered in the Roden Street, Belfast, and Roden Place, Dundalk, and Jocelyn Place. Robert Jocelyn was his actual name, and that's how he's remembered. The next Viscount Powerscourt lived until 1904, but by that stage, the Powerscourt Estate, Benburb, had been broken up. It was sold up in the 1870s and eventually became the Bruce Estate. And so that is an explanation of some of what happened and why the population decreased so much during the time. I'm sorry for over talking by so much time, but I hope you'll appreciate that there's a lot of fresh research here. I've tried to illustrate it to bring out the points. There's a much greater availability, when I've dug deep, a much greater availability of sources that help to tell us not just about this estate, but also about the conditions before, during, and after what we know to have been the famine years in Mid-Ulster and perhaps further afield, that contradict a lot of received wisdom that we have heard over the years. So apologies for taking so long, but thank you for your patience.
Dónal, thanks a million. Here, you've done a marathon there, so you have. Thank you.
Now you know why I was in a hurry, even though it took forever.
No, listen, thank you so much. Before I asked Jared to comment, I found it interesting. One of the projects, one kind of the relief work projects, was the distribution of lime. Sounds a bit again, another ludicrous idea that in the times of such poverty and desperation, it was, you just kind of, and then also considering rerouting of a river, like crazy stuff. Roden, do you think he was kind of guilty of distributing what we call fake news these days?
No, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say fake news, but because he was a man who had his finger in a lot of pies and was an important person. He was not shy about. He was being reported, and he wasn't shy about saying things.
So he's vocal, more so vocal.
He was vocal, but you have to bear in mind that certain newspapers, like I can't work out what the relationship was between him and the Newry Telegraph. It's curious. In the 1830s and 1840s, the Newry newspapers are actually coming out 2 or 3 times a week, 3 times a week in some cases, and they're actually your main source for local news in some instances. And he seems to have a very close relationship with the Newry Telegraph. Oh, yeah. So it may be just be that they reported whatever he said verbatim, and it's this whole idea that people were loyal to them, and then they were, demonstrations of loyalty came in all shapes and forms. So that's why something that Roden was saying was being amplified through different forums.
The celebrity of the time, nearly, in some ways. Yeah. Jared, have you anything to add?
Well, I haven't got an awful lot to say. Dónal, first of all, thanks a million. Very comprehensive survey of the times, and I know I've read some of the stuff, so it's fantastic local information. And I remember when I was going through my Viva for my thesis on Armagh, and I remember the external, very prominent historian saying to me that it wasn't just enough to come from an area. That didn't justify the research. And of course, he was right to the extent that, when you do your studying and you gain your various skills, a PhD, DPhil, whatever it is, and you develop your analytical skills, it helps you then to analyse. And we heard Dónal there just throwing out various ideas about sources, not just going with the one notion. You know, he's posing various questions as to the sources and reading between the lines, etc. But what comes through strongly from listening to Dónal and having read it is that it is the love of the local area. That it's the knowledge of the area. It was his father who initiated Brendan, who's a great historian, highly regarded in that area, did an awful lot with Dónal, etc. And it's when you listen to it, and it's the knowledge of the lanes and the fields. And I know from working County Leitrim and family there that fields are not just fields; they've also got names which go back generations as well. And you know, when you get into the area, and Dónal alluded to it again, about the family connections. When you look at a list, it's difficult to work them out. And it really stood out for me last year, maybe quite an unusual way, when I was working on the Clan of Gael Lurgan book, where you realise that when some famous footballer had a family and you were looking for his sons maybe 15, 20 years later, he didn't have anybody. He had daughters playing camogie. And, you had this incestuous link within the club. And it's the same at a local level, that you're looking at lists of names, and it's only the sort of research that Dónal does. And even then, you don't get all the answers, but you can see who's related to whom and what's going on and why certain people leave and others don't. And I just think, it really is love of area. And I remember Dónal made reference to it there, Charlie Dillon's article on the Moy area, and I thought it was fantastic because it just was so in depth, and it's that which provides the backbone. So when you're going through a general survey of a county or a province, you rely on this work to such a great degree because it is so detailed, and it's born from local knowledge and love of the area.
And on that, just for anybody listening who thinks, that if there's an article written about the famine in their own area, that may have been written 20, 30, 40 years ago, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is through various sources, newspaper archives online, National Archives, Dublin, other places in Belfast, there are more sources out there in many localities that have been fully investigated. So this is just an example of what you can find. You mightn't find that amount, you might find different things, but we have not yet, despite Jared's immense work on this, we're still not quite at the bottom of the depth of the famine in Ulster. It's probably fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask, this is kind of separate to topic, but I know it came up in previous lectures. Trinity College seemed to be a big landowner throughout the island. How would they've come to have such large ownership of land? Does anybody know?
It was arising out of the plantation, and I'm not quite sure.
Oh, it is, of course. Yeah, it is. It's from the land confiscations of the early 1600s. They were one of the biggest landholders in Ireland. They held huge estates in Kerry. And as Dónal alluded to, they're college lands. One of the famous teams in that part of the country as well, college land, around the Moy, full of McGearys. And so it was called that because of Trinity College. And they didn't do an awful lot during the famine, certainly in the college land estate. But they owned huge amounts of land. I think they were the third biggest landholder in the country, because of land that they got during the confiscations of the early 1600s.
Yeah. For people who don't know, Trinity College is now a key university in Ireland and Dublin. Okay, just interesting. Sorry, Dónal, I interrupt you there.
No, Gráinne's asked, was lime wash used as an antiseptic? I'm not best placed to answer that. Jared might know more about what the
lime was used on the land.
Yeah.
The lime was used on the land to improve the quality of the soil. They distributed lime throughout the soil. It was designed to. It was one of those things. Like they were trying to introduce it from the 1820s onwards, along with crop rotation, as you were saying there about improving the standard of the tenantry on the various estates. So lime was used actually in the soil in the land.
But I think it was used in houses as well, Jared. There's references to houses being around the Moy, for example, that there was whenever there was fever. I mean, a subject I didn't touch upon there, but during the period of the worst part of the famine, a large fever in various places, and then it was around the Moy, and they talked about lime being put around the houses.
Right.
Obviously, yeah, and antiseptic quality, obviously, yeah.
I think there's something I'm going to say. I'm not able to give the definitive on that.
Yeah.
Somebody else asked earlier, is this going to be published or something? I'm hoping to just reiterate what I said at the start. I'm behind on this. I need to get this published as a book. It grew the original article. It's just a matter of getting the time to actually get. I have an arrangement in place. I just have to get this out, and hopefully that'll be in the next year.
Someone actually also said that Oxford University owns lots of land and buildings around, yes, in England, yeah. This is it. A lot of the original universities seem to have a lot of major land ownership.
Well, Trinity was one
Yeah.
of the pillars of the establishment. It wasn't just a university, you know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
Catholics couldn't enter it for hundreds of years, so it was seen as the pillar, one of the pillars of the establishment in George in Dublin. Yeah.
And can I add the royal schools that were established, would they have been large landowners too? Or, well, to a certain extent, or just
Not
out
that
of
much.
curiosity?
The Royal Schools were established the early 1609 was the Armagh Royal School. You had Royal Schools in Pretoria and then a Skillen Royal School Armagh. And a couple of others. But I mean, there's actually interesting information from the Royal School in Armagh in the early 1800s that Carpendale, who was the principal of the school, he died of fever in 1819 after the crop failure of 1816-17 led to a fever epidemic. But they weren't large. No, they did own land in the areas, but certainly in my analysis of Armagh, the Armagh Royal School does not come across as a major landowner, no.
Okay. No, Dónal, thank you so much. I think that brings us to an end tonight.